I'm Michael Diviney, as I said, Executive Head of Thought Leadership at Chartered Accountants Ireland, and you're all very welcome today to our webinar to mark the publication of Recruiting Talented People by Dr. Mary Collins. Mary Collins is a chartered psychologist with a doctorate in organisation development, who has worked in the leadership development field since 2003. Her current role with the RCSI Institute of Leadership involves working with senior leaders to develop their capabilities. Prior to joining RCSI, Mary was Head of Talent and Learning at Deloitte Ireland. We're very grateful to Mary for writing her book and for sharing her experience and advice. It was a pleasure working with her on this publication, which is a must-read for anyone who wants to recruit and engage the best people. This webinar is very timely. As we emerge from the effects of the COVID-19 restrictions, we are hearing from our members the key issue and top priority is finding, recruiting and engaging talented people. The focus of today's discussion is what employers can do to address this issue. Based on chapter 1 of her book, Mary Collins will first present about the new rules of recruitment, an evolved approach to talent acquisition and management made more necessary by the COVID-19 pandemic, which has accelerated changes already happening in the employment market, such as the expectations of the younger generations. How has the pandemic and remote working experience changed the employment market and heated up the war for talent? Have employees' expectations changed? Has there been a shift in bargaining positions? After Mary's presentation, we will discuss these questions with our expert panelists. Caroline McAniff, Head of Recruitment and Employer Branding at Vodafone, Ed Heffernan, Co-founder and Managing Partner of Barden, a recruitment firm specialising in the professional services and IT sectors, and Karen Lanigan, Head of Member Experience at Chartered Accountants Ireland, who has extensive experience in recruitment and career coaching. After the panel discussion at around 11:50, we will open the webinar for your questions to the panel. Questions can be general or asked of a specific panel member. In asking a question, please can you use the Q&A feature on Zoom. Now, by way of introduction to Mary's presentation of the new rules of recruitment, it is useful to share a quote from Josh Burson Mary included at the start of her chapter of the same title. Back in 1997, McKinsey coined the phrase war for talent. Today, one could argue that the war is over and that the talent won. Mary, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Michael. Good morning to everyone and a warm welcome to our webinar this morning. I'm delighted to be here and particularly delighted to have our wonderful panelists here today to discuss this really important topic, recruiting and retaining talent. So I'm just going to go and share my screen and hope the tech gods are looking fondly upon us. Great. So I'd like to share with you this morning the new rules of recruitment. And this information I'm going to share with you has come from a significant amount of interviews with thought leaders in the recruitment and talent space over the last number of years. It all culminated in the production of the book, Recruiting Talented People. And in truth, this book was written pre-COVID, pre-global pandemic, the most part of the book. And we were concerned when the pandemic hit and really the recruitment market went into a state of flux. But actually, we all agree that there has never been a more important time to shine a spotlight on recruitment and retention, particularly when it comes to professional services. So I'm going to share with you the new rules of recruitment, the key trends we're seeing. So to start, the first rule, the balance of power has really shifted. When preparing for this webinar, I reached out again to some of those international thought leaders on recruitment. And to quote a CEO of a global recruitment company, demand for talent is the highest it has been for 30 plus years. This is spreading from the US to Europe and beyond following vaccination rates. And I'm sure many of you on this call today, if recruitment is top of mind for you, will agree that it is a candidate-driven market. A white glove level of service is expected. Candidates expect a premium service from the moment they engage with you to the moment they receive that job offer. One of the other recruitment leadership experts I spoke to this week mentioned to me that there's a perfect storm at play here. We have an increase in demand for roles within professions, and we also have a lot of people questioning their careers, questioning at post-pandemic the purpose and meaning in their life, and considering change. We'll speak later about the whole concept of the Great Resignation, and some of you may be familiar with this term. Quite simply, this refers to the fact that many professional people are deciding to change careers at this point, to move organizations. And it is predicted over the next 6 months in particular, we're going to see a lot of movement in the talent market. Moving on to the second rule, which is very much connected to the first. It's really key to respond quickly. The speed of play is key in hiring talent. It's important to show respect for applicants and be aware of the need to move the process without delay. Career Arc, the Future of Recruiting report, cited response time to candidates was identified as the #1 area in the recruitment process needing most improvement. And just to link back to the multi-generational research that many of you are familiar with and that I've been researching and writing on for the last 10 years, we know millennials are often referred to as Generation Now. They want everything instantaneously. Through their formative years, they're used to getting information instantaneously. They're used to getting feedback instantaneously. And they also want, when they go for a role, they want to hear back without delay. So responding quickly is key. Rule number 3, to continuously graze for talent. So what does this mean? Well, smart organizations are continuously looking for great people. They are attending networking events. They're building up online networks. They're constantly looking at social platforms to find great people. And that individual that you're interested in may not be ready to move now, but in 6 or 9 or 12 months, they may be in a position where they want to change careers. So it's about building deep relationships with your talent community. It's about having very strong alumni networks, staying in touch with people and adding value to them. Rule number 4, embrace innovation. When researching the book, I came across so many creative and innovative approaches using technology to recruitment. The cognitive AI recruiter is a really key development, and the effective use of tech reflects positively on the candidate experience and the employer brand. Michael Overell from TechCrunch cited, candidate data became free to anyone with the skills and tools to find it when LinkedIn emerged. So it is about being clever, and it's about using the data and analyzing the data effectively to find the right fit, the right person for your organization. Rule number 5, network effectively. Recruitment, talent, it's a relationship business. And in this hybrid world we're all in, we really need to amplify our networking skills and our communication skills. The term, the 6 degrees of separation, that we are separated from anyone globally by 6 degrees, first was cited by Frege Caranti in 1929. In 2016, Facebook did further work on this and came up with, we're now at 3.5 degrees of separation from each other. And Morgan McKinley more recently are suggesting that in Ireland, it's 2 degrees of separation. And I think we could all identify with that. So it is so important that we reach out to our networks and we build those relationships. We know employee referral schemes are the top source for quality hires. And particularly when we look at the younger generations in the workplace. And remember, by 2025, it's estimated 75% of the global workforce will be millennials. 75% of the global workforce by 2025. And we know that this generation are very collaborative. They hunt in packs. So that the whole notion of employee referral schemes becomes even more important. How do we get great talent into our organizations? Look at the talent you have and see how you can incentivize them to reach out to their network. Number 6, understand candidates' expectations. You're all familiar, I'm sure, at this point with Glassdoor.com. If you're not, please look it up. Glassdoor.com is the equivalent of TripAdvisor for employers. It's about what is it really like to work here? And sadly, a bit like TripAdvisor, it tends to be quite polarized. So we have people who are really happy writing reviews on the organization. And more often than not, we have people who are really dissatisfied. So it's not an equal playing field, but it is a source that people are going to on an increasing basis. So have a look. What are they saying about your organization on Glassdoor.com? Multi-generational expectations are an important consideration. For the first time in working history, we have up to 5 generations working side by side in our organizations. It's really important to flex and adapt your approach when you consider each of the generational cohorts. What do we know about the newest generation in our organization? So Generation Z, or the Centennials, are born mid to late 90s. So these are the co-ops, the interns, the graduates coming through. And one of the first studies that have been done around the Centennials and what they are looking for in a workplace, it's really, really fascinating. And I've just shared the top 3 factors that the youngest generation are looking for in the workplace. Number 1, supportive leadership. Number 2, positive relationships at work. And number 3 is flexibility. This is quite similar to the millennials. We know from research on millennials, or Generation Y, they're looking to work in organizations that are innovative, where they can get their skills developed. It's about access to experiences. It's about how can I build my network? How can I add to my CV while I'm here? And for both generations, what is absolutely key and high on their agenda is DE&I, diversity, equality, and inclusion. Is this an organization where individuals are recognized and valued regardless of their background, regardless of their sexual orientation, regardless of any differences, that everyone can be themselves in this organization? And that notion of inclusion becomes very pertinent when we consider this hybrid world of work that we're all re-emerging into. And rule number 7 in the new rules of recruitment is about embracing diverse skill sets. Many professional areas are guilty of going to the same talent pools year on year. We're looking at the same universities, we're looking at the same degree programs. There is a real opportunity to expand and look at diverse educational qualifications. To put a focus on the encore career. With people living and working longer, there are opportunities for people to retrain, to reskill, and perhaps to look at people who've made changes to their careers more later in life. So again, not going to our traditional graduate pools, but looking beyond that. We have seen an increase in returnships, and this is predominantly related to women returning to the workplace if they have decided to spend time with their families and returning to the workplace. So again, there's really innovative programs out there in different organizations around returnships. And the boomerang employee. So I am of the firm belief, having worked in the talent and leadership space now for nearly 20 years, that we need to manage exits in a much more positive way. When somebody decides to leave, particularly from a younger generation, it may be the case that they want to do their stint abroad. They want to go to Australia for 2 years, but then they will or may decide to return, keeping the exit very positive, staying in touch, again, building that community of talent while they're away. And the door is always open for the right people to come back to your organization. So in summary, if I were to sum up with 3 points, I think number one, be very clear on the values of your organization, your employee value proposition. What is the culture that you really want to promote and develop with your talent community? Number two, really focus on the importance of diversity and inclusion, particularly as we move into this hybrid way of work. And number three, put a focus on retention. What about the great people that you have already in your organization? So instead of focusing on exit interviews and doing those well, what about staying interviews? What about checking in with the talent you have and making sure that people are fulfilled and happy and see a strong career trajectory within your organization? So thank you for listening. I hope that has prompted some thinking, some action, and sets the scene for our panel discussion. So Michael, back to you.
Thank you. That was great, Mary. Very thought-provoking, very enlightening presentation. If anyone has a question for Mary, please ask it via the Q&A feature on Zoom. We'll endeavour to answer all your questions after our panel discussion. So now begin with a question to Mary Collins. Mary, you've written that talented people always have choices. Has the pandemic escalated or heated up the war for talent? For example, has the experience of remote working affected expectations and choices of talented people and further changed the new rules of recruitment, as you call them?
Yes, I believe so, Michael. I think to quote that CEO I mentioned, there is a perfect storm happening in the talent space in professional services at the moment. Anecdotally, we hear that a lot of people have been stuck in their roles and they have been questioning their fulfillment around their careers. So I do think we're going to see people making decisions around their future careers. And a lot of that will be tied in to the flexibility that is being offered in their workplace. It's very, very interesting. Some people have really embraced home working. I was speaking to someone only this week who said they absolutely hated it at first. And now they've really grown to love it. They love the lack of commute. They're a lot more productive and they're really enjoying working from home. And they're absolutely dreading having to go back. And I think there's a real opportunity for organizations now to manage this re-entry and to avoid that great resignation, as we're calling it. One thing we need to be very concerned about is around diversity. And I think if we women have been adversely affected, professional women during this pandemic, lots of research to support that. And my concern is when we move to this hybrid world, is it going to be women and perhaps minority groups, people with disabilities, that will be the ones that will be at home? And perhaps they'll be missing out on career opportunities, on even important decision making, on the water cooler conversations, as we call them. So I think there's a lot of challenges ahead post-pandemic.
Okay, thanks, Mary. And I was going to ask the same question to Caroline McAniff of Vodafone. Caroline, if you could, yeah. Hi, Caroline.
Hi, how are you?
And hello to our panel. Thanks for joining us. Caroline, what's your experience at the moment? Do you think there's been a sea change in the landscape for recruiting talent?
Yeah, I mean, we can definitely see it starting. You know, we're starting to have people turn down jobs because we're not offering 100% work from home at the moment. You know, in Vodafone, we're just launching our hybrid model where, you know, people can work 40% in the office, 60% from home. And that's not a target, you know, it's really flexible, where we're going to let people, you know, if you're working on a particular project, you might be in for 4 days in a week and you mightn't come in again for the next 2 weeks. You know, it's very flexible. But that's just starting. And, you know, we're seeing, I suppose, where candidates in the market maybe are looking for more than that. You know, as Mary said, you know, they might have been at home for this whole time, haven't commuted, and all of a sudden they're thinking about an hour and a half in the car. I really don't want to do that. I'm willing to hold out till I find somewhere that I don't have to do that anymore. And then the other thing that we've really noticed is where candidates who are on the job hunt previously might have had maybe another offer, then I might have 3 or 4 offers for other jobs that when we get to offer stage. So, you know, the market is definitely really buoyant, and speed is 100% of the essence when trying to get people on board.
And do you think these changes were happening anyway? You know, was the move towards greater flexibility?
Yeah, I mean, I do think they're I suppose what I've always found over the years is that you kind of have to do your time first to build the trust. You know, you had to be trusted to be able to work from home. You know, and that was just the way things were, you know, and like I would say probably a lot of the tech companies had started to bring in the hybrid way of working over the last few years, but there was still that piece there where you still kind of had to pass your probation period, shall we say, before you were trusted to maybe work a day from home. And I'm speaking generally there. Obviously, that's not the case at every company. But the pandemic has forced the hand there, and people have proven that they can be trusted and they don't need to put in their time. You know, people want to do a good job.
It has been quite a positive experiment in trust, hasn't it? It's
100%.
A revelation that most people just want to work and get on.
Exactly. People want to do a good day's work. You know, very few people are coming to work just to pass the time.
No, they want a sense of purpose and sense of achievement.
Exactly.
So Ed Heffernan, you're at the co-face of professional recruitment. What's the talent acquisition landscape like at the moment? And as we emerge from the restrictions and offices start to reopen?
I'll give a go at answering that, Michael. The first thing I will say, though, is someone pointed out to me recently that I'm closer to my pension than to my leaving search, right? Which is quite sobering. But what Mary pointed out in terms of the aspirations of Gen Z, supportive leadership, positive relationship at work and flexibility, they still sound good to me, right? So I think there could be a positive wind, I guess, brought through by that generation. You know, maybe we should look to embracing it. So Michael, I guess I might echo some of the sentiment that Mary shared there and Caroline shared there in terms of, I guess, supply and demand. I'd like to maybe go back and talk a little bit, if it's okay with you, about the why this is occurring, okay, and what's likely to occur over the coming months, okay, because it's obviously still a very emergent situation. Okay, so it's very hard to be definitive about these things. But I guess what we saw on the coal face, right across our professional services practice, was that around January of this year, organizations began to get ambitious for the future again. Okay, and what that meant is 2 things. Number one, acquiring talent for that ambition. Okay, and number 2, building back up teams which maybe had been denuded in the previous 12 months or so. Okay, so we saw a surge in demand almost across every industry, including hospitality, airlines, aircraft lessors, etc. I guess starting out of the starting blocks in January. Okay, and that has not in any way denuded up to this moment in time. Okay, so you have intense demand. Okay, now companies are collections of individuals, but as a collective, they think differently to an individual. Okay, so what's happening on the other side, the supply of talent side? Okay, well, people are a little bit more cautious about themselves and their own future. Okay, so there's been, I guess, not the same level of supply of talent to match that demand. Okay, and why? For loads of reasons. First of all, people have their existing working patterns that they don't want to damage or change when there's uncertainty about the working models of the future. Okay. Secondly, there's a lot of positive sentiment out there. The guys were good to me. I'm not going to leave them straight away. Okay, so there's some pent up positive goodwill there. Okay. Thirdly, people wanted to go on their summer holidays, right? Real human things. I'll hang around, I'll go to Spain, I'll come back at the end of August, and then I'll make a call on things. Okay. And a variety of really human factors, like I'd love to meet my boss rather than just Zoom with them. Okay, have dampened down what might be the normal level of supply that might exist in the market. So we've entered into a kind of almost vortex where there's excessive demand and extremely dampened supply. Okay, and what does that do? Is as Mary mentioned, that just makes it a candidate-driven market. People have choice. People have expectations, and the competition out there is about organizations attempting to meet those expectations. Okay,
so the great resignation hasn't happened, as it were, or...
Sure, but what I would say to you is down to Mary's point on that, right? So I just did a little bit of research before this call, and in the US in April, May, and June, something like 11.9 million people resigned their jobs. Okay, that's an actual material percentage of the workforce. Okay, and as Mary mentioned, with vaccination rates, it's spreading from the US to Europe. Okay, so and that leads to my next point. Over the next 3 months, I think we're going to see situations, things flip in terms of the supply of talent in the marketplace as we naturally go through that, like many other countries are going through already. Okay, the big challenge though is, and I think Mary mentioned as well, people were at home with their work over the last 18 months. Okay, and I've heard probably from 15% of people I've spoken with in the last 6 weeks that when they were at home with their work, they realized they didn't enjoy the work, and they're starting to seek out new ways to spend their time. So there may be a supply of talent, but that talent may not know what they want to do. Okay, and that's going to make it for a very, very tricky landscape, I think, as we head towards the end of the year and into Q1 of next year.
Okay, thanks for that, Ed. It's really interesting. One of the things Mary mentioned in the presentation, and which features in her book, is employer branding. Caroline, you're head of recruitment and employer branding at Vodafone. Can you perhaps explain what employer branding is and how it can how it's a tool to help employers deal with a situation like this?
Sure. So employer branding is basically what people are saying to you when you're not in the room, saying about you when you're not in the room, should I say. So it's your reputation as an employer. Like it's the human face of your brand. So it's the people around you, you know, what they think, you know, the makeup of who is in your business and how they support the product or service that you're selling daily. So like if we look at your reputation, and this comes back to, I suppose, what Mary was saying about the retention piece. Okay, so your employer brand is built up of the people that you already have. Okay, so as an employer, there's two types of employers at extremes. Okay, so if you're an employer who's flexible and with your employees, you trust what they're doing, as we spoke about already, trust is so important. You understand that work isn't their life. You're challenging them, you're giving them stretch projects, you're allowing them to learn and grow in the job. And, you know, you're treating them like you would like to be treated. You know, they will enjoy working with you. They'll tell their friends. They'll, you know, if the conversation comes up, they'll speak highly of you as an employer, and they will be loyal to you. And more than likely, they're going to stay. Okay. Whereas on the other hand, if you're micromanaging your people, if, you know, they're 15 minutes late and you're giving them grief about it, whereas you're not acknowledging the fact that they did an hour's overtime Monday night and they worked through most of their lunches, you know, you're texting them in the evening and expecting responses without acknowledging they have a personal life, and they haven't really done anything different for the last year or learned any new skills, they are, you know, they're not going to be happy, and they're going to tell their friends about it. They're more than likely going to go on Glassdoor if they're not on there already, and they're probably looking for a new job because somebody else down the road is going to, you know, their friends tell them about this great employer that they're with who will provide them with all these things that are easy to fix. They're really easy to fix. And it's those stories that come out of your business that is your employer brand. So there's people are talking about you. You can't control what's coming out of their mouths, but you can control how they feel in work. And that's the key piece.
And does this apply equally to SMEs and small and medium-sized professional practices? I mean, branding is, you know, their resources are quite limited compared to the larger company.
So the great thing about employer branding is that you don't need a budget. You know, like I've worked in a number of companies, and some companies have big budgets and some have small, but the budget is to be used for recruitment marketing, events, you know, banner advertising, paper advertising, but none of those things matter if it's not true. So for an SME, for example, if you're treating your people well, they're going to tell their friends. If you have a job, they will tell their friends about it. They will share it on their LinkedIn happily. You know, you just need to encourage it. It's the same with Glassdoor. If they're happy in their job, you can encourage them to go on Glassdoor, have conversations, say, guys, you know, we need to find some new people. We're doing really well. We want to get new people in the business. It'd be really good if you could go on Glassdoor and talk about your experience here. You know, if you're confident in your company and the way you're treating your people, you should have no problem in encouraging people to go on Glassdoor and talk about it.
The sense of there's a sense of associative pride. You know, I work in such a base now. It's not a big company, but it's got a good CSR policy. It's got a good sense of purpose, and you know, so it's something you can talk about.
And you're recognized. Yeah, as Mary says as well, that for the D&I piece, that you're recognized no matter, you know, nobody's treated differently. Everybody's treated the same. And this is hard, you know, all of this is hard, especially for an SME who, you know, you've 100 other things coming at you, to take the time to stand back and say, right, we need to make sure people are treated well. It's, you know, it's hard work, and the same to be always looking for new talent, always to be on you know, putting things out on LinkedIn or ensuring your job specs read well, whatever it might be. It takes time and it's hard, but it works.
As Mary says, constantly grazing for talent, looking for
absolutely
being connected. And Ed, do you see a difference in employer branding? Does it make a difference to recruiters?
Oh, enormous. And sometimes, like I guess to what Caroline said there, there's a phrase that rings true, I think, in this regard. It's not about what you say or do, it's how you make people feel. And that is your employer brand. And often, well, very often it starts with the leadership. Okay. And that's why an employer brand can be hard to change, because sometimes it doesn't fit with maybe some of the approaches of current leadership, right? So it can be quite a challenge for people to change their employer brand, because it means then way more than just the logo, right? And a lot of the time, the employer brand, when it comes to actual recruitment, it's down to the hiring manager. People join people. So we'll talk as much about the background and personality of the hiring manager as we will about the organization itself. because that's in reality the manifestation of the organization the employee will experience. Okay, so it's fundamentally important, but it's harder to change than one might think.
Yeah.
Right.
But what we're seeing, Michael, is that, I suppose candidates are being a lot more discerning in terms of their thinking and their selection of their employer. So they're taking a lot more time, and I think COVID has definitely accelerated this. That there's a lot more, I suppose, reflection taking place. They're thinking more holistically about their next career choices. What is it that they actually want from their next role? And it is, as I said, a much more holistic approach. So it's not just about the role. It's not just about the organization. It is about, I suppose, incorporating their own lifestyle, I suppose, into the role as well, and looking at how the I suppose the role will fit in with their own requirements. It is looking at as we've already discussed, how the I suppose the employer kind of shows up. So they may talk about culture and all of the good things that are going on about within the organization, but are they actually living those values, and can we see those actually come to the forefront within the organization? So it is about diversity, inclusion. It is about sustainability and a lot of those very I suppose relevant topics at the moment, and candidates are going out and looking and doing their research, and if they don't see evidence that companies are actually living those values, they will look elsewhere, as it were. And Ed made an interesting point there in terms of loyalty, and that's been created through COVID, and I think that's really important, because if an organization showed up in a positive way, supported their staff during the pandemic, that is something that candidates will place value on, or that employees will place value on, should I say, and that is the type of experience that employees are looking for. We also spoke there about I suppose the talent within an organization, and I think it's really important to kind of showcase that talent. And there can sometimes be a reticence to do that, because for fear of losing your people, that if you put your good people up in lights, that they're going to be headhunted or whatever. But I would as well challenge that thinking, because I think it is really important to showcase the talent, certainly from the perspective of showing your existing staff that you value them. So it's good for them in terms of their profile, but also as well in terms of your employer brand. It's really important to show the talent that is there within the organization, because anybody coming in can benefit from that talent and what they have contributed to the organization. They can also see what the potential is for them within the organization, that they have potential to learn from others, and also in terms of an interview process, I think it's really important that you put your best people on the panel, as it were. So again, it helps in terms of getting that employer brand across, and really interesting potential employees in the organization.
Thanks, Karen. What you're describing there, and what the other panelists have really described, is I think are quite significant changes in the employment market over the last even number of decades. The generational change particularly seems to be one that's coming through. There are skeptics, or there's a certain skepticism towards that, whether it's really changed that much. But a lot of the research, as Mary indicated in her presentation, is indicating that there has been quite a seismic cultural shift. Caroline, we hear a lot about Gen Y and Gen Z making up today's workforce, or certainly the future of it, and their different expectations. What's your experience of Gen Y and Gen Z, and what makes them tick, and how should employers adapt their approach, if you like?
Mary would have definitely hit on this earlier, when it's like they want feedback all the time. Okay, so regular feedback. They want to know what skills that they're going to gain. So so years ago, when you joined a company, you were joining it for a long time. Now, most people are joining a company to learn new skills. And when they've learned those skills and they're not learning anymore, they're going to look for a company where they can start learning skills again. So and that's why we spoke about, you need to be continuously looking at how you can grow them, stretch projects to learn, so that people feel that they're growing all the time. So they want growth, they want development, they want to know what they're doing right, what they're doing wrong, how they can be better. They want that feedback, and they want opportunity, and they want strong managers. Ed touched on this with regards to the leadership piece, and you see that regularly on LinkedIn. People don't leave companies, they leave managers. So your managers need to be strong and need to I suppose have the power to treat their people as they feel that they should be treated, like in a correct way, but also have the ability to let them learn new skills, help them to stretch, and that should be expected of them.
Right, so it's made people management even more important. It's not something that manager can do off the side of her desk anymore.
Yeah, and so many people get promoted because they're great at their job, but doesn't necessarily mean that they're a great people manager. So or even want it. And I suppose probably in professional services there's very much a train, a step ladder to become a manager. And people can be fantastic in their day-to-day job, but not fantastic as a manager. And I think the model within professional services that can be a problem, because some people don't want to manage people. So it's definitely an area that individual contributors, down the line fairly soon, I would say, that area needs to be looked at more, and not everyone wants to become a partner. So that's an important piece as well.
Okay,
so it's all about supporting that career development. From the time you're recruiting, that you can show a particular career path, and that there will be that support there for the person as they go through their career, that you're mapping, you're working with them collaboratively to map out their career plan, and that they can see that there will be support along the way. As you said, Caroline, that feedback is important, zoning in on the key areas that they need to develop, that you're giving them guidance and support, and you're investing in them in terms of them developing their skills, but importantly that they can see the trajectory that they're on, and that there's clear communication and support around that.
And Karen, what are you hearing from members of Chartered Accountants Ireland specifically? What are the challenges for them in this employment market?
Okay, so from I suppose a recruiter perspective, it's everything that was mentioned there in terms of the challenges of predominantly recruiting staff. Like we're not seeing a mass exodus as such, where we are seeing recruitment taking place. It's generally and typically it's because the company are expanding or are developing, or one client I spoke to last week was bringing on a new pipeline of talent, because they could see from from the progression within the organization that they didn't have a fresh pool of talent coming through. So as Ed was saying, it's in that development space and growth space, as opposed to kind of backfills at the moment. And it is essentially a challenge of supply and demand is essentially what we're seeing, and having that choice in terms of candidates. One area that has worked quite well for us is in terms of focusing in on the returners market, and working with our clients in a consultative way to kind of say, look, to help diversify or open out your pool of talent. How would you feel about recruiting a returner? And that has worked quite well for us. We've had quite a number of members who've returned to the workplace that we have placed, and also then looking at part-time roles. So rather than maybe recruiting at a more junior level, recruiting somebody at a more senior level, but on a part-time basis. And that has worked quite well as well in terms of, say, small to medium-sized organizations recruiting at a more senior level. So that has worked quite well for us, and it speaks to the whole I suppose diversity and inclusion aspect as well. So that's all very positive.
Right. Thanks, Karen. Just conscious of the time, so I'll just ask one final question, quite a general question. First to Ed, what advice would you give employers approaching today's employment market find and retain the best people.
Yeah, well, we'll definitely take Mary's PowerPoint seriously, right?
Yeah.
And I guess, look, everything comes back to that saying for me. It's not about what you say or do, it's how you make people feel, you know? And sometimes actually we use language, even language like management or candidate or employee, right? But if you tear all that kind of facade away, what are we dealing with? We're dealing with human beings. We're dealing with people who have hopes, dreams, and aspirations. The people who are, you know, how they feel on a Sunday night before they go to work, right? So there's a lot around feeling that I think sometimes gets lost in translation when it comes to process, recruitment, retention, okay? And I think that there's a lot of work that hiring managers or leaders out there can do introspectively in relation to that before they start a recruitment process, okay? So I know that's not very practical because people don't like hearing words like feeling, right? But it's just at the absolute core of everything, right?
Yeah.
So that would be my quick tuppence on that, Michael.
Well, that's great. I think it's timely to say these things, you know, because they obviously they're having a big effect and a big influence. Caroline, what would you advise employers to do?
I agree 100% with Ed. And it is really a different way of looking at business. Like, and you know, and it's, you know, how would I feel if I was them? You know, if, so for example, being micromanaged, how would I feel if I was being micromanaged? You know, and how would I feel if I wasn't trusted to do my job?
Yeah.
You know, thinking about it from someone else's perspective, I would, for the smaller companies, I would ask your employees what makes it great to work here. What could we do better? How would you enjoy it more? Have those open conversations. And then when it comes to the recruitment piece, speed is of the essence. Speed and also authenticity as well. You need to be real.
Some of what you're saying sounds counterintuitive. If an employer has, you know, say 3 vacancies they need to fill urgently to keep their business going, the last thing they're going to be thinking about is feeling. And, you know, the longer term strategies like employer branding, they're going to want somebody in a desk, you know, or wherever.
The employer branding piece is a long game.
Yeah.
It doesn't you can't stop it. You know, you have to be at it all the time, and it builds up. It's like a rolling ball. You know, and it can be broken down really quickly. So, you know, you have to really mind it. You have to mind your employer brands. And that's much easier, I believe, for smaller companies, because in the bigger companies, there's so many people can go rogue and you don't know what they're up to. You don't know what they're saying at interviews. You know, you don't know what they're doing, you know, whereas a smaller company, you have a lot more control. So you might feel you're at a disadvantage, but you actually have an advantage over the bigger companies. But it takes time to build it. And look, this is hard work. You know, it's certainly not easy. And the more people, if you have your employees behind you, it definitely makes it easier because they will be your biggest supporters.
Okay. Yeah, it's really sort of, one hand we're saying act quickly, move quickly to find the right people, but in the long term, build up your employer brand, the feeling of what it's like to work in your organization and look after your people. So it's a mixture of tactics and strategy, really.
Yes.
The other thing to think about, and this is probably slightly more in the, you know, kind of the immediate space, is to actually look at you know, the skill set that you're recruiting for, because a lot of companies, I find, tend to just go straight back to the role that they recruited for before, and they have a particular vision in mind in terms of, okay, I need to recruit exactly the same person or skill set that, you know, I recruited in the past. But if you stand back from it and say, well, look, what does the company or the organization actually need now, as opposed to just reverting back to how you've always recruited for that role, or look at it and say, right, so what exactly do we need? Where are the gaps? Where are the, you know, the what are the core skills that I need? It may help you to look at this through a slightly different lens and kind of realize that actually, do you know what, the skills that I've always recruited aren't exactly what I need now. There's a different, you know, kind of skills requirement, or, you know, to look at this in terms of, well, you know, okay, I need these skills now, but what do I need in kind of 6-12 months time? look at it through that lens. I was speaking to a small practitioner recently, and he said to me, he said, Karen, I've shifted my thinking and I'm looking more in terms of recruiting for potential. So, maybe taking on more junior people and developing them through the organization. So it's really kind of stand back and say, well, what is it that I'm looking for, and that whole potential and attitude piece is something that's really important to zone in on as well.
There seems, Michael, to be a thread running through what both Caroline and Karen are saying there, right? And I think it is, to your point too, it's the if you are constantly recruiting on a reactive basis, you're doing something wrong.
Exactly.
Because nothing can change. Okay. And in my experience, a significant proportion of recruitment is reactive to something that's often outside of the employer's control. Someone leaves, maybe maternity leave, maybe they win a new contract they didn't expect, right? So if there's one thing that employers in SMEs in particular, where it's harder to be proactive because you're fighting all day, every day, right, is if you can just take a little bit of your time to try to be a little bit proactive about attracting talent into your business, even if it's only 10% of the time, over time, what's going to happen is you're going to affect change.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's just a thought.
That's really valuable. Thanks, Ed. Really useful insight. Again, from your experience, you can see that working. Just on the retention question, we have a couple of questions about that. Mary, first of all, to you, you mentioned a staying interview, interviewing somebody to encourage them to stay. What would that conversation sound like, or what would the questions be like in such a conversation?
Yes, well, just to go back to what Caroline mentioned there, we know that people leave people. I did my master's thesis on retention 20 years ago when I worked in Aircom. That tells you how long ago it was. And it very much was consistent with all the research, and it hasn't changed in 20 years. People leave managers. So the staying interview is very much around understanding the individual drive, motivation, and career aspirations of your team member. And I really like, Michael, if I can quote the title of one of your recent articles in the Chartered Accountant Ireland journal, Budgeting Time for People Management. This is it's a critical activity that can't just be done over a coffee on the side as an add-on. It's about having really good quality conversations. And that's where I think coaching as a skill set is really important. So we know coaching as a leadership approach works really well, particularly for the younger generations. So it's about, opening it up. Where do you see your career going? Really open questions. How are you feeling about your career right now? There's the feeling, Ed. There's the feeling word. How are you feeling about your career right now? What are you enjoying most about work? What's frustrating you? So creating time and space for quality conversations. Yeah,
and actually, just that touches on something that Ed mentioned the other day when we were discussing today's webinar. I think it was Ed. Somebody has asked about how to fast track employer branding in an organization, and Ed, I think you mentioned the fit between the senior management and what's actually happening on the ground in the organization. That it needs to come from the top. The time needs to be put aside for these conversations, and for people management to happen in this meaningful way, I suppose.
Can I make one observation, right?
Yeah.
I've secretly been counting something as this webinar is going on. So the word management or manager has been used something like 37 times. The word leader and leadership has probably been used about 6 or 7 times. Right? And there's something funny in that, because I don't think humans want to be managed. I think humans want to be led. I think we appoint managers to manage tasks to produce outcomes. We appoint leaders for hearts and mind stuff. And if there's something that won't work if you're asking actual managers, okay, to have hearts and minds conversations. So there's something broken out there in the language. Okay.
Right.
And it's almost like taking us 3 steps back and trying to kind of think around this in a totally different way. And sometimes it starts with language and who we appoint as leaders, you know?
Yeah.
So sorry, I was just doing that on the side.
Well, that's, you know, it's fine. It fits to that point about the leadership. The organization needs to buy into this approach, and it's a change of approach, I think. Another of our attendee or participants today, somebody on the webinar has asked about, you know, how do things work with remote or change with remote working? How does management, sorry to use that word, or leadership, or the relationship with that person continue and flourish if they're working remotely, even if it's only part of the time? Is that something that or is that another webinar perhaps?
Michael, if I can just jump in there, I think the two key areas of consideration with the remote working, number one is well-being, and it's about the boundaries of work and life. We know loneliness is at its highest levels with the younger generations. So 18 to 24-year-olds are experiencing really high levels of loneliness in work. So checking in, how are people doing? How are they managing those boundaries between work and life? I think that's really important, sort of the well-being, the mental health component. And secondly, it's about communication and the need to really amplify communication. And for some people, they will want really regular check-ins. For others, it might be, let's have an hour in the diary once a week. Once I know, I can connect back in. So I think the well-being and communication are key with remote working.
Okay, thank you, Mary. And I think we'll give you the final word there, actually. We're just coming up to 12 o'clock. But I'd just like to thank everyone who attended our webinar today. We hope you found it informative and useful. I'm very grateful to our panelists for their valuable contributions today. Ed Heffernan, Caroline McAniff, Karen Lanigan, and our author, Dr. Mary Collins. Thank you also to Chris O'Donoghue and Sasha Brinkley for support on event production. And finally, a reminder that Mary's book, Recruiting Talented People, is available to buy from charteredaccountants.ie/books. That's our online bookstore. But thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks
Bye-bye.
to everyone.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much.